Good morning. Can people please take their seats so we can get started on time? Thank you. We'll be getting just started in just a moment. We have people joining us on Zoom at 8:30. You guys were the quickest seated and quietest crowd we've had here in quite a while. It usually takes me 2 or 3 efforts to get everybody to take their seats. So if you'll just give us a moment, we'll get started in just a minute. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're really delighted to be back in this room. This is a room we were pre-pandemic where we held most of our in-person events. Haven't had a chance to be back here in quite some time because we, as you all know, we do so much more of our programming online, but we have a terrific partnership with our friends at the Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center. And we're delighted to be back in this space. We're also going to, of course, be back in the building for our annual dinner on July 23rd. And I know that many of you who are here in the room will be joining us here for that. So thank you. And thanks to those of you who are joining us online. Since the pandemic, we've done over 300 webinars and we've had over 30,000 guests online. We're so glad to be back in person, but also to be with you online here today. We have a program for today's event that you can find scanning the QR code that was in the back of the room, and it's also was sent around by email today. Format today is pretty simple. First, we're going to hear from Senator Maria Cantwell, who represents Washington State since 2001 in the United States Senate and previously represented Washington's 1st District in the House of Representatives. She's going to speak first. Then we're going to have our panel come up, and I will do a brief introduction then. Senator Cantwell.
Well, good morning, everyone. Ken, thank you so much to the International Trade Association for hosting this. And I'm so grateful to be here with Ambassador Hills and Schwab because I think of them as pioneers in a very rule-based, trade-based system that we need to continue to support. I also want to thank Nasim Fussell. We had a chance to work together and obviously appreciate your leadership as what you're doing now, but as then Chief International Trade Counsel to Senator Grassley on the Senate Finance Committee. I think we need a network of Senate Finance former staffers because they're all over the place, and we need more knowledge on trade-based economy. Building alliances and expanding trade, I believe, grow stability and create peace. We're in the Ronald Reagan Building, the International Center for President Reagan, who understood the power of alliance building and of trade. He strongly supported NATO as vital to the defense of our democracy and individual liberties, and working with our allies and stressing the promise of free markets, President Reagan helped end the Cold War. He also championed a Western Hemisphere-wide free trade zone. In the 1980s, Central America was engulfed in civil wars, political upheaval, drug lords, cocaine, and various challenges facing South America. But President Reagan knew that increasing lawful trade would provide alternatives and economic opportunities. And change cultures. I love that I was being driven around by a 21-year-old from Bellingham, Washington, albeit a community on the border with Canada, who said, "Senator, everybody knows that trade changes culture." I was like, well, I don't know, a few people have forgotten it in DC, but yes, thank you for reminding me. In 2007, I traveled to Colombia with Ambassador Schwab as part of the Senate's consideration of the U.S.-Colombia Free Trade Agreement. It continued the legacy of providing economic opportunity to fight the drug trafficking, in addition to opening a $3 billion market for U.S. exports. Today, the United States has real economic opportunities in Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Africa. In the Middle East, I believe, alone is a $5 trillion market, and at the same time, there are real national security challenges. In May, Pakistan conducted missile strikes on India, and India conducted retaliatory attacks. This week, obviously, the U.S. engaged in strikes on Iran to prevent it from developing a nuclear weapon, and the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas remains tenuous. I believe we need more diplomatic solutions for the region, and I think trade could be a part of that. Many countries in the Middle East want to diversify their economies and are interested in developing artificial intelligence. I will be introducing legislation to authorize the negotiations of a Middle East trade agreement, an agreement focused on information communication technology. It was built upon what Senators McCain and Baucus introduced 22 years ago to create a Middle East trade preference program in support of the U.S. Middle East free trade area. I happened to travel to that area with them to talk about this. The legislation that I'm considering would have requirements that partner countries join the Abraham Accords, normalize diplomatic relations with Israel, support reconstruction of Gaza, join in the efforts to support nuclear non-proliferation, and coordinate strong export controls. I think these are the approaches that we should be taking in alliance building. Last week marked the 95th anniversary and the enactment of the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which led to higher costs, foreign retaliation, and deepened the Great Depression. Out of these ashes, generations of Americans, like Ambassador Hill and Schwab's, built a rules-based international trading system to lower tariffs and level the playing field. So instead of predictable rules-based trade, this current administration, I believe, is pursuing a more chaotic on again, off again, on again, off again tariff structure that in some instances are higher than even the Smoot-Hawley levels. It has created uncertainty for business and consumers, raised costs, and threatened the supply chain for American manufacturing. I come from one of the most trade-dependent states in the nation, so every time I go home, this is what I hear. I hear that businesses and the impacts that they could be felt are being felt now, but they could be even more severe in the third and fourth quarters. The president has promised new deals, calling for 90-day trade deals in 90 days. I love these women, but I don't even know if you could have pulled that off, could you? 90-day trade deals? We will see what happens at these deadlines, and I expect to see an end to non-tariff barriers like discriminatory treatment of U.S. tech companies in Europe and South Korea, the whole issue of fair treatment of U.S. tech companies in a growing sector of AI and technology is critically important. The growers in my state expect to see an end to non-science-based phytosanitary restrictions in places like Japan and India and Australia. However, we should be pursuing serious long-term negotiations to reach comprehensive trade agreements to open markets and level the playing fields, transparent rules-based trade policies that businesses can see with predictability so their decisions to invest will increase. And we can modernize and reform the rules of a 21st century rules-based trading system, but it is not in the interest of the United States, in my opinion, to blow up international rules-based systems that have worked for decades. Congress does have a constitutional role. The framers of the Constitution gave Congress the power to set duties and regulate interstate and international commerce, and Congress is closest to the people. We hear from our constituents every day about the challenges that we face. Right now, we're in cherry season, and I can tell you the challenges of this for a product that is a short window, has to get delivered to the market, and it's your whole revenue for the year, and we can't get the workers or the markets to sell those products is so frustrating. In the end, it's not that farmers just lose out. Basically, you lose farms, you lose farmers, and we can't afford to have a more concentrated agriculture system than we have today. We need to continue the growth of agricultural opportunities. Any administration should brief and consult with Congress. These two have done that many times. They had to come up and brief us, and that is before the trade negotiation starts or concludes. They know that that's part of their responsibility, and that is how our constituents get input into the process. We raise these issues with these negotiators, and they take it back to the negotiating table. That right now is somewhat absent in this process. Congress approves trade agreements and has oversight over implementation, and these are important checks and balances in the American system of government. That is why I introduced the Trade Review Act with my colleague, Senator Grassley, to ensure that Congress has a chance to approve new tariffs for any president to make sure trade policies are working for Americans. We need to grow trade and prosperity and to keep our country competitive in an ever-aligned world. I am for alliance building right now because in an information age, there is more speed at which markets are opened or shut and shelf space laws to more competitors in growing economies around the world. We should be building alliances right now. I will talk about this maybe in the Q&A, but I believe in a technology NATO. If you want to counter somebody who you think is a bad actor, why not create a democracy-based, rules-based technology alliance that says that the democracies of the world and the most sophisticated technology countries don't believe in government backdoors. No one should buy technology products from someone who has a government backdoor. With that, I will join our panelists and back to Ken, but thank you all very much.
So thank you, Senator Cantwell. The steps are right on the end over there. She's going to be joined on stage by a very distinguished panel. We're delighted to have here with us Ambassador Carla Hills, who served as the United States Trade Representative from 1989 to 1993 under President George H.W. Bush. Ambassador Susan Schwab, who was USTR from 2006 to 2009 and served under President George W. Bush. And our moderator today, Nasim Fussell, the Vice President of Trade and International at Business Roundtable and the former Chief Trade Counsel of the U.S. Senate Finance Committee and the Chair of WITA's Board of Directors. Nasim, thank you, and take it away.
Thank you so much, Ken. I will start by saying I am so incredibly honored, more than I can say, even to share the stage with these three incredible women, trailblazers in their work, and we are just all lucky to be here and listen to you today in light of what is happening in the world around us. So I'd like to start with a broad view. In a world of shifting alliances, growing industrial policy, supply chain reordering, and significant global tensions, how should the U.S. be defining competitiveness? How should we be leading? So, Senator Cantwell, can I start with you?
Well, I just kind of outlined how much I believe in the information age as the driver, right? We're not in the agrarian age, we're not in the industrial age, we're in the information age. And that means innovation is going to happen faster. Information is the feeder to that system. So when we think about competitiveness, we think about what is it that the United States should be doing to stay competitive. And basically, I think innovation is in the DNA of Americans. So I want us to invest in science, let the Americans do the rest, and open up markets for them to sell products. So I think that, you know, one of the things I learned in software is you always have to assess the environment correctly. In the environmental assessment, is that in an information age, alliance building is easier and you have more opportunities. And then second, the growth of the middle class outside the United States is a huge market opportunity. So again, why would you close that off? You should be trying to accelerate that market opportunity. So that's why I think the very important things for the United States to do, and we do have great capital markets. That's how, DNA of Americans in innovation, capital markets in the US create much more innovation faster and sell those products to a growing middle class around the globe. Seems like a pretty good idea to me.
Yes, thank you. And Ambassador Schwab, Ambassador Hills, how do you see the US growing and staying competitive?
Well, I think we have to give a thought to what does it mean to be competitive? And the World Center on Competition has for years done a study, and it has 4 pillars to what it means to be competitive. And it looks at the business efficiency, government efficiency, and the environment that is created. And one of the things they point out is education. And the fact that countries, Singapore, that have high educational requirements and opportunities stay high. They just finished their most recent evaluation. And sadly, the United States slipped 1 point. We're down to the 13th out of 69. You may think that's not so bad. I think it's not so good. We used to be number 1. And so when we think about education, it means not only getting our children properly educated, but maintaining the skill level of our population where the innovation is changing it so rapidly. Keep in mind, in the late 1800s, we had the agricultural revolution. And so many people that were making their livelihood off of the farms fled into the streets and slept on the streets. Then we had the electricity innovation. And the same thing happened. People lost their jobs because you could pick up the phone and call. Then you had in the mid to late 1900s the computer, and that further did it. And now we're in AI and really advanced technology. What should we do? We should think about the people who are losing their jobs, and often they're in the lowest quintile, and figure out the best method of educating them. And one way would be for the federal government to provide a stipend to get me from the place I live. If I live in West Virginia, and first thing I should have said is we post every job in the United States on the internet. And I'm in West Virginia, and I find that there's a great job out in the state of Washington. Government would give me a stipend to get there. The company that needs me, and believe me, there are a lot of companies that need labor help, pays for my 25 weeks of training. And then the company hires me, and I pay taxes and pay back on the stipend. But we need to do something with respect to the lowest quintile, which is suffering the most.
Yes, actually, this is a perfect segue, if you don't mind, if I sort of drill down a little bit to my next question, which is, what role should trade policy play in enhancing American innovation, manufacturing, and the workforce?
Yeah, I think, obviously on the competitiveness question is sort of what they said. And trade policy has morphed into, in bad ways, but also in good ways, the broader definition of competitiveness. So if we look at trade policy, first of all, we need to look at the service sector side of it, because we've talked about education, and I would point to higher education, because we didn't talk about that, but whether it's basic research, but higher education, drawing in the best and the brightest, looking recognizing that services trade and manufacturing, for example, or services and agriculture even, are becoming almost indistinguishable or totally intersecting to create the efficiency and the competitiveness. And so when we're in negotiations, we can't just look at manufacturing or just look at agriculture or just look at, excuse me, or just look at services and think of services in a narrowly drawn definition. I'll give you, forgive me, I want to go to a specific example because I have Fred Smith and FedEx on the mind. But specific example, you think of FedEx and UPS, DHL as package distribution. If you go back and you take a look, you think of it as a service. Well, the fact of the matter is FedEx, first of all, is the first or second largest airline in the world, meaning purchaser of airplanes, hardware, trucks, the ground distribution network, employer of millions of people who have retirement benefits, who have education benefits, who have health benefits, all over the United States, all over the world, a facilitator of commerce and efficiency and competitiveness. And I'll give you a specific example apropos of last week. The B-2s were refueled multiple times in the air by KC-46s, and KC-46s are Boeing 767s. And actually, these are, this is your deal. Boeing 767s, the KC-46s were enabled, the prices were cheaper to the US government because FedEx agreed to buy 767s off the same line to keep that line going, when otherwise it would just have been the US government paying for it. So this is a specific example, but the multiplier effect of a service in the economy tells us that when we're thinking about trade policy and something like cross-border data flows, as a for example, we need to be thinking about it more broadly because it has fundamental implications for manufacturers, for agriculture, and so on. The other thing we need to be thinking about, I believe, is the knock-on effect, the collateral damage that you can do if by raising barriers you are having a negative impact on your upstream, downstream, however you want to define it, your value-added products. And I think we're seeing that in some of the actions that are being taken here and elsewhere. If by trying to use trade strategies to protect one sector, you're creating an uncompetitive circumstance for other sectors and rendering them less competitive, then you've got a trade policy challenge, a trade policy problem that you've got to address. So I'm using specific examples here, but I think it's a sort of a whole of economy approach that we need to be taking to trade policy.
I couldn't agree more. And as you said, the knock-on effects and the impacts across industries are not the same when you have an across-the-board, broad-based application of tariffs like this. Which leads me, Senator Cantwell, to something that you remarked on in your introduction this morning. You have been a leading voice in Congress on the Trump administration's use of these tariffs. And you've even introduced a bill, as you said, with my former boss, Senator Grassley, to rein in the president's tariff authority and to assert Congress's constitutional authority over tariff setting. You also introduced the resolution on the anniversary of Smoot-Hawley. However, the rest of your colleagues have been a little bit less reluctant to engage more publicly in this discussion. What do you think it will take for Congress to weigh in a bit more publicly?
Well, I've tried to articulate that it doesn't matter now this president or the next president. We don't want this kind of swaying back and forth on policy. We want to be clear about Congress's role and responsibility here. And we want to be clear about why that rules-based process is so important. So I was kind of shocked the other day when I asked Secretary Besson about this at the finance hearing, and he quickly said, it hasn't been working. Well, that's a view. That's a near-term view, I guess I would say. But when you think about what is it going to take for the United States to be successful here, we need to return to a rules-based process, and if anything, be having a conversation about how to strengthen it, given that so much of the economy is outside the United States. So to me, I think my colleagues are waiting to see what happens in the next few days, next month, with any kind of deals. They're trying to give the president the benefit of the doubt to see what happens. But I think at the same time, we're also hearing from our constituents all the unintended consequences. I think the Port of Seattle, just in May, we were there, said that they are 33% lower on trade than they were a year ago May, 33% lower. So again, we're a very big trading state, and that kind of decline is going to continue to have ripple effects through the economy. I loved this one small business woman named Molly Moons. She has great ice cream. I don't think she's national, but anyway, she said, I woke up to the tariffs and she said, I have nothing here is going to affect me. I make all my ice cream here locally. I don't have to worry about this. And then her CFO called her on the phone and said, Molly, and she's got probably like 8 or 9 stores around the Northwest. Your spoons come from India because they are disposable and by, compost and all of this. And we're not going to be able, it is going to cost you $240,000 of increased cost to replace that spoon in the United States of America. So now all of a sudden, a small business doing quite well, having employment, woke up to the fact that I really do have a problem. She literally said, I'm thinking about not giving spoons out anymore. And I'm like, wait, Molly, I'm gluten-free. I can't eat that cone. I need that spoon. I'm not going to just take that bowl. So the point was, like, this is what's happening to all these small businesses. And we just, with 70% of job growth in America coming from small business, you just never know where the next big company is going to come from. So I think the one thing our colleagues have to get a little closer to the ground and listen to back home is the fact that these small businesses aren't the big companies, they're not the big corporations, they don't get to come here all the time, they don't get to deliver this message, but they are feeling the pinch.
And there's a lot of talk about how we may get through reconciliation and that there may be more space and bandwidth, candidly, to focus on this. I hope that's true, and I hope that the debate is had in a way that really talks about sharing this authority and taking us away from who does it exclusively belong to, because we have entered a stage where I think both the executive and the congressional are going to weigh in on this, and it long has happened that way, but in partnership. And I think if the debate can move towards partnership with your leadership and Senator Grassley and others, that would be to all of our benefits. So thank you so much. So focusing now on the tariffs and the consequences, you've talked a bit about some specific examples that you're seeing. This overall economic approach, tariffs for leverage and these rapid negotiations, what do you see as the potential unintended consequences here, and what can we do to get away from that?
The biggest thing I'm concerned about, and please, these are two great experts here, but the unintended consequences I see right now is loss of shelf space, never to be regained. And when we had a hearing, which was great, the Finance Committee did hold a hearing, and the soybean industry came to testify. They had charts. They showed what happened in the first Trump administration tariffs, that they had been 60% of the market in China, and they fell to, I don't even remember what the number was, like 20 or 30%, like cut in half. Mm-hmm. And today they're only back to 50. So they never returned. They never returned. And if I could go to the White House and tell the president anything, I would tell him the world has dramatically changed since the last time you had an administration. The world is faster, quicker, the competition greater. The other countries that are going to get shelf space keep shelf space. And I remember going to Egypt after the uprising that was over the price of bread, and I was like, with our delegation and saying we should be talking to them about wheat, and they were like, no. I'm like, no, we have someone from Kansas, we have me, we should be talking about wheat to Egypt. They were like, forget it. Canada already has 32% of the market, and we're not going to get space. We need to get people to understand here in DC, the world is way more competitive than it was before, and they are producing product, and our growers are competitors, our manufacturers are competitors. They can win the day, but you have to help them get that market open. Otherwise, we're going to face the same situation here where we finally get back to something and somebody's going to say, no, we've had a great relationship with the South American country and they're providing this product and we don't need it from you. And that is what we're going to lose, is in a rapidly developing environment where more information, more technology, more skill, we're going to lose shelf space.
Yes.
I think it's three things. One, I think the reliable supplier, the long-term relationships that create export, for us, export relationships, I think those, I agree absolutely with Senator Cantwell. They are getting irreparably harmed, and year after year after year, this is not just the Trump administration, this is the Biden administration. This is a bipartisan.
Oh yeah,
this is a bipartisan.
I had a lot of comments about Catherine Tai for sure. Okay, I was not happy with the Biden administration.
No. I understand, because you've made this point. You have been a champion making this point. But this is one, and I think unless you have been involved in international commerce, you don't realize the value of these long-term relationships. This is not. International commerce is not a spigot you can sort of turn on and off. And there are, unfortunately, politicians, pardon me, and government officials who think you can. So that's one. Two, small business. You referred to small business. I think some of the things going on right now, travesty for small businesses, absolute travesty for small businesses, whether they're importers or exporters. Bigger businesses are going to be able to accommodate a lot of what's going on right now because they're just going to be able to figure out how to make the rest of us pay for it. I mean, ultimately, it is going to, it's just a tax. And the question is how we will end up paying that tax. Because we are going to end up paying, we consumers will end up paying that tax. The intermediaries will end up paying that tax. We're all going to share in paying that tax, but we're going to pay that tax. So bigger businesses can do that. Small businesses can't do that. And so they are going to get squashed. And that, as I said, I think is a travesty. The third, though, and this is the one that I think does the most, has the potential to do the most irreparable damage, is the damage to our competitiveness, which I referred to before. And part of that, we're talking not just the impact on the users of imports, but think about, even with big businesses, the third and fourth tier suppliers that in many cases are smaller businesses. So this is a combination, this is sort of the double whammy, right? The third and fourth tier suppliers, you think about some of the, well, you know, once a quarter we're going to figure out, we're going to look and see what proportion of you're going to tell us what proportion of melted and poured, you know, aluminum or steel input you've got. If you go back and look at what happened during COVID, the third and fourth tier folks frequently have no clue. And the thought that they may be able to trace back, and the cost of tracing back, and the thought that they may actually have people in Washington who can keep track of all this regulatory burden, these are huge regulatory burdens. For, I might note, an administration that really is happily focused on light touch regulation and rolling back some of the terribly burdensome regulations that the last administration put on. So I think those are the three areas that I must say I worry about the most.
Yes, those are all quite worrisome. So I think maybe I'll try for a moment to lift the room with what we might be able to get out of all of this now that we are here, now that we've reached this moment. The administration is in the midst of negotiating many deals. Ambassador Hills, what do you see as the opportunities for the United States in this moment? If we, we're negotiating with some very key trading partners for the United States, like the EU, India, Japan. So what can we hope for to get out of this?
I think we have to be realistic that the American people are not well informed about how important free and open trade are to their own prosperity and our nation's security. Our lack of reliability, we're going to impose a tariff today, we'll postpone it for 30 days, no, maybe we will, maybe we won't, has greatly impacted our credibility across the line. And, when we talk about free and open trade, it's already been mentioned the impact it has on the lowest quintile. The fact is that our small and medium-sized businesses, according to the Chamber of Commerce, make up 98% of our exporters. 98%, not in terms of amount of or the values, but in terms of numbers. And if they can't get their widget sold abroad, they close down. And we need to explain to the public, because I think if we were to leave this room and go out on the street and ask the first 10 people that we meet, what is your view about trade? Are you in favor of opening the U.S. market? I think the majority would not say yes. So we need WITA, and we need to have groups get out and explain why trade matters, which also provides a channel to our Congress, because it's disappointing to know how polarized our Congress has become, and that they do not recognize why free and open trade is to our nation's benefit. In fact, competition makes you better. We've experienced that in World War I and World War II. We got a lot of information about chemicals and pharmaceuticals from Germany. And, as an old tennis player, I can tell you, the tougher the competition, the better you become. So keep it up, let's keep working at it, and we have to work with Congress, and so that it bubbles up and that they know that their future depends upon doing the right thing, not the fast and cheap way to go.
Thank you. And it might be a good time to ask you, Senator Cantwell.
I don't want to be a cheap date.
No.
I think.
We'll keep that in mind.
Go ahead.
But is Congress, notwithstanding our discussion earlier?
Can I just?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
I'm going to offer a note. I hope we come back to this later before we go to the Congress.
Yes.
I agree. I mean, we're agreeing with each other too much up here. So I agree with everything that Carla just said, except this is a very different world than when I worked on the Hill as a staffer, when you were negotiating trade agreements. I think I was sort of when I was USTR, I think things were starting to change. We're in a world where there are major players that aren't playing by the rules, where rebalancing is a legitimate element of the GATT, the WTO, Article 28. That is a conversation and a negotiation that is permitted under the global trading system. And there's a lot going on with countries, and one in particular, that is not playing by the rules. That changes the game entirely. And when the president stands in the Rose Garden and holds up the National Trade Estimate Report, that is a legitimate source for the administration to go to look for major barriers to US exports. And so, unfortunately, that's not the basis on which the quote reciprocal, so-called reciprocal tariffs were enumerated, but that is a legitimate basis for the negotiations that are going on. I could not have done 90 in 90 days. I would not pretend otherwise. But I just want to put that note. We can come back to it because I think the executive legislative branch conversation is a really, really important one. Yes. I just needed to say that. Sorry.
I'll let you go on to your next question.
Okay, well, I'm going to tie this all together for us because the congressional question I had on this is putting aside the bills and what Congress says about tariffs. You do talk to the administration and to the civil servants working with their sleeves rolled up on these negotiations about what is important to your constituents. So what do you hope to see? Have you been having those conversations? And what do you hope to see come out of these? You know, we're obviously doing many negotiations, so I'll let you choose areas of priority.
Well, I'm serious about the cheap date part. The Congress, in the construction of our country and our founding fathers, expected us to play a separate role. And there is a lot of abdication out of fear, out of retaliation that is happening, and it doesn't benefit us as a nation. People in Congress should be able to stand up, speak freely, express their concerns, and get those concerns addressed. We're here to represent people. And so I think on trade, that's the biggest concern I have is that perspective, again, because we're trying to speak for these small businesses and supply chains that Susan so eloquently articulated. And it's a big challenge. I mean, just take aerospace for a second. I mean, we have 150,000 people who work in aerospace, but there's 2 million people in the United States of America. So if you just take China out of the equation for aerospace, that's like, I think it's like probably 30% of the market you're taking away just because all of a sudden we're in a trade war and now you're affecting the entire supply chain and competitiveness. And the French are saying, oh, well, we might go over there and build. Really? How long do you think it'll take China to catch up if the French go over to China and build? Okay, he'll be in a different market. The first 100 years of aerospace, not a lot of competition. The next 100 years of aerospace, tons of competition. And it's 2 million people in our country, and we do it well. We need improvements for sure. But we need to understand the impacts that all of this has. So now I look at this, and I mentioned one example, the Middle East Free Trade Agreement. If the president wanted to pursue something like that, it's clear that these Middle East countries would like to see a relationship as it relates to AI. There's a lot of export control issues there, but you could see that the region could be brought together. I've always liked the fact that Israel is a technology powerhouse. The Technion and other institutions have played a really big role. And I don't know, they're kind of like they could be the glue in a region to move forward into a new era. So why not use trade as part of a diplomatic tool to further our nation's interest, as opposed to right now dividing everybody and basically making everybody mad at us, when in reality it's what do we want to do to create a more friendly supply chain environment. But COVID blew a hole in our rationale about product because now all of a sudden the vulnerability is so clear. And so people are rethinking this. So it would be a really good time to have a lot of more conversation about it. And just in this debate, I'm so surprised at where people are because of the modernization of the North America Free Trade Agreement. And all of a sudden, we have unions who are saying, I don't like the president's tariffs because we were getting affordable product out of Mexico or Canada. They were helping us keep jobs in the United States of America. And I don't like the fact that that's going to get disrupted. So the conversation and opportunity is understand the big picture of supply chains and understand what alliance, like a Middle East alliance, could help us do and get back to the good old aspects of trade policy that really was about stabilizing other countries. Way cheaper than military action. Definitely cheaper than military action. I don't know that anybody has ever threatened a nation over the sanction. I mean, they've threatened, but you see what I'm saying, that nobody has a retaliatory attack on your country. They might have a sanction against you, but they're not going to escalate to something based on sanctioning them.
Well, both Sue and the senator have mentioned the need for a rules-based order. We need to remember we broke it. We had the World Trade Organization, and we pulled out of it. I'm not saying that the World Trade Organization did not need to be modernized and upgraded. It had the three functions of negotiations, monitoring, and then keeping it modern. And instead, we pulled out of it.
We're still there. We're still there. We're still at the WTO.
Yeah, you bring a case in the WTO, and you violated the rules that you and the senator want to impose, and I lose the case. You appeal, I appeal it. It goes into the closet. We have about 45 cases in the closet that have never been resolved because the rules-based order has been destroyed by our pulling out.
No, because the appellate body sucked.
Okay, then you fix the appellate body. Keep in mind.
We agree on this. We need a
Could I
faster.
finish this
Yes,
idea?
yes.
History helps. We had the GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. They only dealt with tariffs, and we had a lot of problems in the other areas. So what did we do? We negotiated the World Trade Organization, which dealt with services, intellectual property, tariffs, and had a dispute settlement mechanism. Well, I mentioned that our intellectual achievements have just grown rapidly over the last century, and we needed to keep the rules up to date. We did not do that. We did not monitor who was abiding by them for the most part and who wasn't. Of the G20, more than half never notified when they gave a subsidy. That was required. And then we had complaints about how the dispute settlement worked. I agree. We developed a pretty good idea of a dispute settlement in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which we could have borrowed and put into the WTO. We didn't do that. We didn't take the leadership on that. And in fact, we pulled out of the trade TPP, which further damaged our credibility. Can we be relied upon to do what we said today, tomorrow? Take a poll in the world, we come in very low. So there, I would say, get a group of like-minded nations to upgrade and modernize. If you don't want to call it the WTO, okay. I think it should be modernized. There are plenty of things, and I've talked to the people at the World Trade Organization who understand that we need the rules, and there are things we can do that would upgrade it, okay? If we can't do it, we create a polarized system, a pluralized system, and that could make an enormous difference. When I was negotiating the North American Free Trade Agreement, it was the first agreement after the GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. And then we put in the rules governing intellectual property, services, investment rules. And we finished it in 93. President Bush signed it. President Clinton got it through in 94 through the Congress. And within 4 months, the Uruguay round, which had collapsed, the then 123 members came back to the table, took all of the provisions out of the NAFTA and put it into created the World Trade Organization. We could do that again. We could have and if we can't get consensus, which is the problem that the WTO faces, okay, let's get a group of like-minded nations together. And they don't have to be democratic. They could be monarchs. Vietnam is communist. Come on into the association. Just abide by the rules, and we need a mechanism for enforcement.
So if I may, what I am hearing actually sounds really great, which is that we are in this moment, we are negotiating these hundreds of deals on any given day. Why not bring them together and create an alliance with like-minded trading partners? And that might be the opportunity we can seize here, because that's something I'm hearing consistently from all three of you, is that we need to return to rules-based order, but with like-minded partners to counter the imbalance and the threat, which I'll just say it, we're facing from China. And it's not just us, it's many of our partners. So you touched on some of the experiences that you had between NAFTA, the Uruguay rounds. Ambassador Schwab, you actually served as USTR during the rise of China at the WTO and negotiated many free trade agreements as well. What lessons would you take from those experiences to give to our negotiators today? What should they be? How should they be making this alliance come together?
So I would start, first of all, by saying I am still a proponent of the World Trade Organization and the GATT. I mean, I think the GATT fundamentals are critically important, and I think we lose track of, and we give short shrift to the very important things that have to be done multilaterally. And think about, for example, the protection of intellectual property. You can't just have 5 countries protecting intellectual property, and just to give that as a for example. And so there are a whole lot of things under the radar for most policymakers that are critically important about the WTO. It's not perfect for everything, and I do agree that if you can't get consensus, in parallel, and that's already happening, quite frankly, you have 1 or 2 countries, like India, that are blocking some of the plurilateral agreements that are being negotiated in parallel. But we've done there are precedents for sectoral agreements and functional agreements at or in parallel with the WTO. I think that is those are good precedents that we can follow. The notion of the like-minded countries, and if you are not going to abide by it, then you should stay out. And there can and should be enforceable rules. So I think that is part of it. So you've got your multilateral system for things that need to be done multilaterally. I think trade facilitation was another great example of what can and should be done multilaterally. So you've got your sectoral options with your like-minded countries. I think you need an enforcement mechanism, and enforcement, quite frankly, no country is ever going to give up its sovereignty to an enforcement mechanism. No country, period. But what you can do is rebalance, over a disagreement. It's almost, you can call it retaliation, you can call it whatever you want, but it's going to be a rebalancing of some form or another. So I think that's an inevitability, and you can put rules around that. That's another option. And then you can, I like the idea of sort of pasting together existing agreements to see where you've got comparability. I think the key question comes with MFN. And I think ultimately we're going to end up in a path where we have non-MFN plurilaterals. They exist, there are precedents for it. The government procurement agreement is such a precedent. But there are actors who are just simply never going to play by the rules. And that's China, on a lot of, on certain, not all, on certain aspects. Right now, the US on certain aspects. And we just, I think that ultimately is the way to go. And if you're going to play by the rules, then you get in. If you're not going to play by the rules, if you're going to pledge to play by the rules and you don't actually play by the rules, you don't get in. And what the WTO lacks is a mechanism to kick out countries that aren't playing by the rules. I'll stop there.
WTO already has a
Oh,
mechanism.
I should
We
add,
have Article
I
25.
should add, you asked about experiences. I'm going to add 2 experiences. One, you need to know when to close a deal, and you need to know when to walk away from a bad deal, which was my experience with the Doha round. There was a lot of pressure to close a deal in the Doha round, and we didn't. And President Bush said, if you got a good deal, you close it. If you don't have a good deal, you don't have to close it. And that, you know, to his credit, that made negotiating really the best possible set of circumstances. We negotiated our hearts out. We could not get a good deal for the US. Second goes to the issue we were talking about earlier, that Senator Cantwell was talking about earlier. We did as much negotiating with our side as we did with the foreigners.
Thank you. Thank you.
And that was a good use of time. And that was with the Congress, huge amount of time with the Congress, both sides of the aisle, huge amount of time with the private sector. When I say private sector, I include unions, I'm including environmentalists, I'm including the broadest definition of the private sector. And I commend this administration, which the last administration totally abandoned. I think the cleared advisory structure that was set up in the '74 Act is absolutely vital to negotiators to know what the private sector really cares about, and they in turn can share that with the Congress in an educated way, where they are with you along the way in the negotiation. And if you're about to do something that they're going to go up to the hill and try to kill later, you'd like to know about it now. So what I learned in the Doha round.
Did everybody write that down? One last question, Ken, if I may. I would like to close with a question about what we do here domestically. So industrial policy, it's just impossible to have this conversation without acknowledging that, whether we're talking about how much that has been a key component of China's rise. In the last few years here in the United States, certainly we're not taking the China route, but we're starting to think about, okay, what do we need to do domestically to ensure our competitiveness? And you know, with Congress, we have seen the CHIPS Act, we had the IRA. Can we expect more legislation from Congress in, you know, I'm not going to define a period of time, but is this something that Congress is thinking about as a part of our competitiveness, or do you think we're going to be mostly seeing tariffs as a way to deal with this?
Well, it is alarming. First of all, I should say every person that was a predecessor before me, I think, has the same view as I do, and that is that we view China as a market. And you know, the Northwest, I always say we were trading with China before Lewis and Clark showed up. So we have an orientation towards wanting to see that market play by rules and open it up. And our involvement, mine particularly in chips and science, you know, we got this question a lot. I think of the infrastructure bill, the IRA bill, and chips and science as really more of a price signal. We're investing in innovation in the United States of America. We are going to try to accelerate the R&D cycle. We are going to try to test bed and build faster the next great ideas. And obviously, when you think about our leadership in AI, that changes the game as well. And when you say that, all of a sudden we saw this investment coming to the United States from all these countries because they were like, that's the place to be. That's the place to do the innovation. That's the place to invest. And I think that even we'll see what the numbers are for this quarter. If the numbers for this quarter are still decent, I will advocate that we grew 800,000 jobs that are middle class jobs. If we go back to growing 2 million jobs, we'll be back to growing the middle class again. So this notion that we said, come to the United States because we have a very distributed system of R&D. Think of us as a very flat, distributed system. We have definitely a lot of commercial R&D from companies, but we have a university system. That's right. We have government R&D. We have think tanks. We have all of this, and it's a very distributed. Why is that so important? Because in an information age, that's a lot of flatness that creates a lot of ideas that then, if we do a better job at test bedding them, which means getting them to scale faster, the United States, a perfect example of this, very excited about in my state, fusion technology. We have 4 fusion companies, and I didn't know fusion was here, okay? I thought my staff forgot to tell me something. I was like, what's up with fusion? But literally, Microsoft has a power purchase agreement to get power from one of these companies by 2028. So we'll see what happens. But if something, like fusion, that's a game changer in a very big way. So for us, what we need to do is keep innovating. And I do have concerns about the amount of cuts to all of these, the NIH and NSF and all of this is the opposite direction we should be going. So will we keep the United States being this beacon? Well, now we threw this tariff regime on there that makes it harder. But one thing I just want to leave with, because I definitely do believe in a more faster resolution process of the WTO. But the big thing that we're missing here is how much the innovation culture of the United States of America has to be unleashed. Because if it's unleashed, I guarantee you Americans will compete. It is just in our DNA. And how much we're not thinking about this sea change in 2029 when the majority of the world population became middle class. I worked in the internet space and people are like, well, how hard was that? It wasn't hard. The internet was a self-selected group of people who already had a lot of disposable income or they weren't on the internet, okay? So easy market in some ways, very easy market, people with money. Okay, now all of a sudden we have this ginormous middle-class population outside the United States and we have this juggernaut of innovation in the information age in the United States. We need to marry those two ideas. If we do, I guarantee you our economy will be very, very strong for the future, and we will play a key role in helping the world economy grow as well.
Good point.
Excellent point, and such a great note to end on. So I'm going to hand it back over to Ken to see if we have time for questions.
I don't think we have time for questions. I'm going to make an observation. The conversation just now about competitiveness alongside our trade agenda. And I'm reminded of something I've been talking about with folks that I've had an opportunity to. And Susan and Ambassador Hills may remember this. And actually, Senator Cantwell, when you were in the House, S4 was a bill in 1993 that Fritz Hollings, who was then the chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee, you are the ranking member of now today, was a competitiveness bill that was meant to travel alongside consideration of the NAFTA and the Uruguay round, and it didn't get out of the Senate. And I just looked it up because I wanted to just refresh my memory. The 3 short titles of that bill, believe this, I couldn't believe it. Information Technology Applications Act, that was one of the short titles. It combined these 3 bills: Information Technology, Manufacturing Technology and Extension Act, and the Wind Engineering Program Act. It was an incredibly bill with a lot of foresight, and it was actually incorporated in a lot of ways in the CHIPS Act and in the IRA bill 30 years later. So there has been a lot of efforts to do a competitiveness agenda that can travel alongside a trade agenda, which is what I'm hearing a lot of on this panel today as a way forward, perhaps, on trade that we're going to continue talking about here at WITA. We are very grateful to the four of you for joining us today, to all of you who stuck around here in person, those of you online, thank you so much for being with us today. Thanks to Senator Cantwell for coming to WITA to speak today. Thank you, Ambassador Schwab, Ambassador Hills, and Nasim. Thank you so much for joining us today.
That was great. You did a great job.